Welcome in, everybody. I see the room is starting to fill up here on Zoom, and I want to welcome everybody into today's virtual speaker session. We will be getting started at about 12:03, but if you want to go ahead and use the chat function that you can see there across the bottom of your screen, you might have to click the More button and tell us who you are and where you're zooming in from and your Penn State class year. We'd love to see who is in the Zoom session with us today. Again, we are excited to bring today's virtual speaker session to you, featuring Dr. Peter Boger and Paul Shrivastava. We will get started in just a couple minutes. Again, welcome to the Alumni Association's virtual speaker session. Sophie Penny is here from State College, staff member and Alumni Association Life member, and one of my professors in the College of Education. So good to see you. Actually, College of Liberal Arts, if I remember. But good to see you in the Zoom today, Sophie. If you're just joining us, go ahead and tell us where you're from and where you're zooming in from and your Penn State class year. Jim and Joyce from State College, 70 and 71. Terry Aschnauer, Ag 66 from Atlanta. Terry has become a regular on the virtual speaker session. Good to see you in there. We're still trying to figure out a way to send you creamery ice cream and maybe get that in the stores down in Atlanta. Wouldn't hold your breath, but it's always good to dream big. So good to see you, Terry. Again, our Zoom room is filling up here. Welcome to those who are also watching on Facebook Live. We will be getting started in about 3 minutes. Doug Mason, class of 82 from Grays Woods, Pennsylvania. Welcome. I see David and Lydia Vanderberg. Good to see you, class of 1987, biochemistry and molecular biology. Joan McLean's on Facebook Live. Good to see you, Joni. Stay safe out there in Los Angeles. Sorry about your Pittsburgh Steelers tickets this year. I just saw your post on Facebook. Peggy Bauer Glazer from the class of 70 is joining us from the College of Liberal Arts. Welcome. We'll be getting started here in just a minute or two. We're letting the Zoom room fill up here, and welcome to our viewers on Facebook Live as well. Good afternoon, everybody. Where else would you rather be than a Zoom full of Penn Staters? Thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's virtual speaker session. As a reminder, today's session is being recorded. Today we welcome Dr. Shrivastava and Dr. Peter Boger to the virtual speaker series. Dr. Shrivastava is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Penn State, the Director of the Sustainability Institute, and Professor of Management at Smeal College of Business. And Dr. Peter Boger is the Assistant Director of Community Engagement for the Sustainability Institute. Today's discussion is the latest installment of a recurring series of virtual programming brought to you by the Penn State Alumni Association. Additionally, the Alumni Association offers a host of online networking and career programs and other webinars. You can see the full list of our event offering at alumni.psu.edu/events. In 1970, more than 20 million Americans, including student leaders at Penn State, took to the streets and classrooms in an environmental teach-in for the first Earth Day, one of the largest demonstrations in American history. 50 years later, as we celebrate this exercise in planetary scale thinking, it's worth not only celebrating Penn State's sustainability legacy, but exploring what the next 50 years may bring. What does a just, equitable, and sustainable future for everyone look like? And how can Nittany Lions help revitalize this vision? Dr. Shrivastava and Dr. Boger will answer these two questions and discuss much, much more during the next hour. So thank you for joining us via Zoom and on Facebook Live. And thank you, professors, for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul, so much for the invitation. And we're really excited to be here and joining you all. Again, I'm Dr. Peter Boger, and this is Dr. Paul Shrivastava. And hopefully everybody can see my slides and screen, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to speak for a little bit, and then Paul will jump in after. But we wanted to start talking about Earth Day, even though that was back in April, because this year is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And so this year's 50th reunion class that would have been coming to the We Are weekend in June before COVID canceled that is really part of a very special legacy, because they were here at the founding of Earth Day. And I noticed in the chat, we actually have members of the class of 70 here who may well remember exactly what it was like here on campus, and look forward to having a good Q&A and conversation when this is over. And it's important to kind of look back at the history of Earth Day, in part because it's something that's very well known, and it's something that I think it provides us an annual opportunity to check in and think about these big, broad global issues. But I think it's also important because I think a lot of us have started to take the wrong message from Earth Day, and that started even at the very beginning of Earth Day. That people missed an important point of Earth Day that we're now trying to bring back into sustainability. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So I'm going to go through a little bit about the origins of Earth Day generally, what happened here at Penn State, and bring us up to the present. And then Paul will take over and talk about where we are now in the present. But going backwards, you have to remember where we were in 1969. So there'd been a long conservation movement that started back in the progressive era, back in the 19-teens and 20s, with the founding of the Forest Service and the National Park Service. Then there was the Wilderness Act. So there was that track of people thinking about global and national and local kind of conservation issues. And then really after World War II, you start to see the kind of arrival of people starting to think more about what we'd call environmental issues. So especially with things like atomic bomb testing and the idea of hidden toxicity that we don't know where it's coming from, but we know it might be affecting us, starts to permeate the culture. In 1962, you have Pennsylvania native Rachel Carson's The Silent Spring coming out, which becomes a national bestseller and gets people to think about this hidden idea of toxicities and things like pesticides. But then with the advent of television and mass media news, you really start to get people more aware of how these things are starting to interconnect. And it really does come to a head in 1969, the year before the first Earth Day. So for example, as you see in this picture, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio caught fire. And there'd actually been a major fire back in '52, which is where this photo is from, and all the way back to 1889. But now people across the nation are seeing this on the news and going, that's water catching fire. Water isn't supposed to catch fire. Water is supposed to put out fires. And it really awakened a consciousness of there's something wrong. We're doing something harmful, and it affects us, and it affects our recreation. It affects our health. It affects our children and our future. And similarly, in that same year, you have the Santa Barbara, California oil spill at the start of the year, which at the time was the largest oil spill ever. Still is the third largest in US history. It spilled 3 million gallons across 35 miles of coastline. And the national news was, again, integral in really giving people these images of wildlife and beaches covered in oil, and this sense of kind of guilt and doom and worry and people feeling vulnerable. And so there was a lot of agitation that was really coming to a head in 1969 of people going, this is something we need to be addressing. And you're already in an era, obviously, when there's the anti-Vietnam War movement, there's the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, there's the start of the gay rights movement. There's a lot of kind of people-powered focus on democratic action. How can we get involved? And at the time, this gentleman here, Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin, who was the former governor of Wisconsin, had always been really interested in conservation. He'd been involved in the creation of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and protection of a lot of natural lands across the country. But he was giving a speech out in Seattle at the University of Washington, and heard there that students were planning to do an environmental teach-in, and that they wanted to apply the same techniques and tactics that they'd been using to talk about the Vietnam War and about civil rights, but now talk about that in terms of the environment. And he really got interested in this idea and said, this is something that needs to be across the country. And he wanted to set something up. And so when he got back to Washington, he actually created something called Environmental Teach-In Incorporated. And basically, pre-internet era, when people don't have a way to find each other easily, he created a national clearinghouse, advertised it in the New York Times, hired a staffer for it, and said, if you've got ideas, if you want to do a teach-in to really get people excited, if you want to do community engagement, if you have ideas, come send them in. If you have questions, send them in, and we will try to connect you and set things up. And it was actually pretty revolutionary. There were a lot of people in Washington who said, yes, let's do this, but this needs to be nationally controlled from the top down. And we want to have a national organizing committee that they actually suggested should have Jacques Cousteau and Gloria Steinem and Ralph Nader, and they should be the ones, as the national faces for this. And Nelson said, no, this has got to be from the ground up. This has to be reflecting what people are concerned about in their communities, in their neighborhoods. They need to be the ones who take ownership of this. And over the course of the year before this planned Earth Day, which nobody knew what it would be like, more than 1,000 K through 12 schools and about 40 colleges and universities contacted Environmental Teach-In to get ideas and to connect with each other. But nobody knew what would happen. And if you were alive then, what you will remember is that it was an unprecedented success, that it's still considered among the largest, arguably possibly the largest public demonstration of more than 20 million people worldwide. There were marches. It turned out more than 10,000 K through 12 schools participated, more than 2,000 universities across the country. And really just broad participation of people getting involved and finding what was important to them in their communities and taking action. Now, for those of you who are here at Penn State also was a great leader in this, but you may also remember it came at a pretty rocky time, because as I said earlier, this was the era of anti-Vietnam War protests. And actually the week before Earth Day, there had been a protest that evolved into arguably a riot where 5,000 students chased the Penn State president back to his house and threw rocks at the house. And so there was a lot of concern, what's going to happen? Is it going to be peaceful? Is it going to happen at all? And actually, as it turned out, it was a very peaceful occasion. There was a teach-in side of the equation where there were lots of faculty and student groups on campus who had panel discussions, talks, they had lectures, they had film series, but there was also an art festival that was happening downtown that had singers, that had art exhibits and displays, and they actually invited the two gubernatorial candidates that were running for governor that year to have a debate here at Penn State that was centered very much around the idea of the environment. And so Earth Day early on seems to presage a lot of successes. If you look at what happened around the time of Earth Day, it really is this crystallization of people becoming aware of the environment and the need to act on it. And it was very bipartisan. I think we've all gotten so used to so many issues, whatever they are, being hyper-partisan today, that it can be refreshing to remember that back in 1970 and the early 70s, these were passed with broad bipartisan support, both left and right, under a Republican president. And from that, you get the National Environmental Policy Act, which is the act that allows all federal projects to be reviewed for their environmental impacts. You get amendments to the Clean Water Act, you get the Clean Air Act, you get the Endangered Species Act, and the EPA was created. And not all of this is directly because of Earth Day, but I think Earth Day helped crystallize a movement and also helped show politicians just how broad the support was for these issues and just how much people were caring. But Earth Day's also been a bit of a failure, you could argue, because at the time, a lot of people from the left were saying, you're distracting from anti-war efforts. We really have to stay focused on Vietnam. And a lot of people are saying you're distracting from the civil rights movement. We're right at a critical moment of really trying to make serious gains, which obviously, as we've seen this year, we're still fighting to make gains. And then you had criticism from the right saying, this is all going to promote government interference, too much government regulation. This is big bureaucracy run amok. And then there was a criticism that is still, I think, very much relevant to what we're talking about today, which is that a lot of what was happening on Earth Day represented only an environmentalism of the white middle class, that the concerns that people were expressing were often not in my backyard concerns. There's a power plant, there's a polluting industry, get it out of my backyard. But then people not caring, well, where did it go? Not saying, well, how do we actually make it cleaner in its processes, or how do we actually decide if we need that industry, but just make it go away. And too often the answer then was it went away into neighborhoods of color and low-income communities. And so there really were all these disproportionate impacts that the environment was having on people of color, on low-income communities that nobody was talking about. And in fact, the environmental movement didn't really consider for another really 25 years until the early 1990s when President Clinton signed the Environmental Justice Executive Order that finally put environmental justice as part of the federal government's thinking about how we think about these big interconnected environmental issues. And people also pointed to the fact that there was a lot of privilege that didn't really get examined in a lot of the protests. So for example, here, this is an image from the first Earth Day where students at San Jose State University were, cars are bad, cars are evil. And so they buried this 1970 brand new Ford Maverick into the ground. And a lot of critics said, well, that's nice for you. Great that you can afford to take a perfectly functioning good automobile that would help a family get to work, help them pick up their kids, help them shop, and just put it in the ground and waste all those resources. You're not necessarily seeing the kind of big interconnected issues. And I think this really points to the thing that people really have missed about Earth Day. Because a lot of people look at Earth Day and they think it's about the environment, it's about recycling, it's about clean air, it's about clean water, or even less kind of activist, a lot of people now see it as a chance to plant a tree. All great, I'm all for recycling, I'm all for planting trees, but you are missing these kind of big systemic issues. And the thing is, they were there from the beginning, we just forgot to talk about them over these last 50 years. And the evidence of that goes back to Gaylord Nelson. So I'm gonna play here just a brief clip. This is a clip from his speech that he gave at Milwaukee Technical College the night before the first Earth Day. And listen to his vision of what we're really talking about, because it's not that narrow environmentalist, clean air, clean water that people started to focus on. It's a much broader and more holistic picture.
I don't think there's any other issue viewed in its broadest sense which is as critical to mankind as the issue of the quality of the environment in which we live. You hear the word ecology. That's a big science, not a narrow one. It's a big concept, and it is concerned with all the ramifications of all the relationships of all living creatures to each other and their environment. It is concerned with the total ecosystem, not just how we dispose of tin cans, bottles, and our garbage. It is concerned with the habitat of marine creatures, animals, birds, and man, and our goal is not just an environment of clean air and water and scenic beauty while forgetting about the worst environments in America, in the ghettos, in the Appalachians, and elsewhere. Our goal is an environment of decency, quality, and mutual respect for all human beings and all other living creatures. An environment without ugliness, without ghettos, without poverty, without discrimination, without hunger, and without war. Our goal is a decent environment in its broadest and deepest sense.
So that's the articulation. And if you hear that, what he's talking about are questions of social justice. What he is talking about are questions of fairness and equality, questions of political institutions, issues of war. He's really trying to put this into a broader, more holistic context. And that is what was really been missing in some ways from people's understanding of Earth Day for the last 50 years. But I think that's starting to change. And one of the ways you see that is this year. This is a poster somebody made for this year's Earth Day, when we're all experiencing this COVID crisis. And one of the things that we've all started to see with COVID is just how interconnected so many of these issues are, that you can't talk about public health without talking about racial justice and equity. You can't talk about climate change and not talk about these issues of epidemics, or vice versa. And so it's creating this kind of awareness that these interconnections are how we need to deal with things. And in fact, that's what Penn State is really starting to try to do. And for that, I will turn it over to Paul. If you're there.
Thank you, Peter. So that's a really perfect setup for what I want to talk about a little bit. Great history of the Earth Day. Some of the challenges that we saw back in the 1970s have not entirely gone away. And the failures of thinking about the environment in narrow terms are now coming back to haunt us. So at Penn State, what we are trying to do is to imagine this notion of sustainability as a solution for the challenges that environment and human relationships with the environment poses. And there's been a lot of discussion in the last 50 years about what is sustainability in its very academic form. It was defined by the Brundtland Commission in 1987 as an approach to economic growth that allows our generation to meet their needs without jeopardizing the needs of future generations. But this idea of sustainability is rather abstract. It is not very actionable. They talk about future generations, but we have to live in the present. And so we at Penn State, when I arrived here 3 years ago, we were sort of at a point where the university had already made significant commitments to moving in a more holistically sustainable direction. We recognize our land grant mission and roots. We had a strategic plan in place that had five, in fact, what we call thematic priorities, two of which were stewarding our planet's resources and health and care, well-being of our communities, which are both directly connected to sustainability. However, operationally, when I came here and asked people, what does sustainability mean to you? Most of them still reacted in the way Peter pointed out as the failures of environmentalism. They thought about recycling, they thought about food waste, they thought about planting trees, they thought about reducing the use of chemicals, but they didn't think holistically about what it means to make Penn State sustainable within the context of Pennsylvania, and to make Pennsylvania sustainable within the context of the United States, and to make the United States sustainable in the context of the planet. We are now in 2020, and we are now facing a world which is very different from what it was in the 1970s or in the 1950s when I was born. The world was less than 1/3 its current population. So I refer to that period of the 1950s as, or before 1950s, as the empty world. And today we are living in a full world. In a full world, there are no meaningful boundaries between nations. What happens in one country spills over into others. The virus might occur in China, but here we are in the rest of the world all dealing with it. Climate change issues might arise in one nation, but they overflow into others. So we need to think holistically, and by holistically, I mean in a holistic planetary sense. And we don't want to think just about being green. We are also trying to be socially just, economically thriving, and technologically innovative. So sustainability to us at Penn State involves doing many things at the same time. And I'm going to talk about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a framework that we have adopted in a second. But let me just point out that the biggest difference that I see today is that we don't face an environmental crisis alone. Virtually all our underlying systems are in crisis, because this current COVID crisis occurred before we could resolve the climate crisis. So the climate crisis is still there. And the biodiversity decline and biodiversity crisis is also still there. So today we are facing what I call omni-crisis. Most of the underlying systems are in crises. We can't afford to deal with them each one at a time. We need to think about reforming the whole system. And that brings us to the global agenda that 192 nations have agreed to under the United Nations. It's called Agenda 2030. And it articulates 17 very operationalizable goals on which sustainability can be built at an institution-wide level and at a national level. This is a one-page rendition of those goals. I'm going to make it more readable, go to the next slide and read out a few goals for you and make a few remarks about what are our goals. So this is what we are defining sustainability at Penn State University. Goal number 1 is end poverty in all its forms and everywhere. Goal number 2 is end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Goal 3 is ensure healthy lives and promote well-being of all at all ages. Goal 4 is ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and providing lifelong learning opportunities for all. Goal 5 is achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. Goal 6 is ensuring availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Goal 7 is ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy. Goal 8 is promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth. Goal 9 is build resilient infrastructures, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Goal 10 is reduce inequality within and among countries, and also within countries, so among people. Goal 11 is make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, and sustainable. Goal 12 is sustainable consumption and production. Goal 13 is take urgent action on climate change. Goal 14 is conserve, sustainably use the oceans, seas, marine ecosystems. Goal 15 is protect, restore, promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. Goal 16 is about promoting peace and social justice and good governance and strong institutions. And goal 17 is about doing all of the 16 goals in a collaborative and partnering mode. A couple of comments. You can see, obviously, these 17 goals, only 6 of them pertain to environment. The remaining 11 of them really deal with social, technological, cultural, economic sorts of changes. The second thing I'd like to point out is these goals are universal. We can't imagine one community, one institution, one state, one country being sustainable. We have to imagine the whole planet being sustainable and be inclusive of people everywhere. And the third important thing to note is the interdependence between the goals. You can't achieve one goal, and if you pay attention only to one, you might be actually making negative contributions to others. So you need to think holistically about this interdependence, about the trade-offs between goals and the synergies among them. Next. Okay, you can go to next. So I want to start by taking a look at how we in Pennsylvania are doing on these sustainable development goals. And what you see on the slide, this slide, is a study that was completed last year by the Sustainable Development Solutions Network at Columbia University that went and measured our performance on sustainability or the sustainable development goals for all the 50 states. And the states are in the rows, and in the columns you have goals. So column 1 is goal 1, column 2 is goal 2, and so on up to goal 16. And yellow color means that red color means you have no chance of meeting the goal by 2030. The green color means you are very likely to meet that goal by 2030. And yellow and brown are in between. So brown is closer to red and yellow is closer to green. If you look at where Pennsylvania lies in this chart, we are number 30 out of 50. And we have one of the few states which doesn't have a single goal in green. That means of the 16 goals, we are not likely to achieve any of them by 2030. And even in a goal number 6, which is water and sanitation, which many states are showing green, and Pennsylvania should be showing green because we have surplus water. And in the next 20 years, we are going to have 10% surplus precipitation or rain. We are not even green on the water goal because a lot of our water gets polluted because of stormwater runoffs and agricultural practices and so on. So we have a huge challenge in front of us in Pennsylvania. And if you look on the chart on the left, that's where we, Penn State University, are located, the 23 campuses of Penn State University. There is no other university that can actually adopt and deliver on implementing sustainability across the state. Most of the universities are concentrated in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. None of them have the kind of geographical distribution that we boast. So given our land grant mission, this is something that we are committed to doing, building sustainability for Penn State and its campuses within the overall context of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Next. I'm going to skip this because this is just the same studies describing what's going on in cities. I want to leave us some time for discussion, so I'm going to skip through to a couple more, 3 more slides maybe, in which I want to talk about how we are doing sustainability at Penn State. So let me just briefly say that our approach to sustainability is not a quick and dirty one, focusing on the low-hanging fruit. We want to institutionalize sustainability. We want to make it a permanent part of the operating system of the university. Now, this is a huge ambition. This is very aspirational, simply because we are a very large institution. $6.8 billion in our annual budget makes us bigger than the GDP of 40 countries. We have 23 campuses, we have 13 colleges, we have 100,000 enrollment, 17,000 employees. So to move a big ship like this, we need to be patient, we need to be deliberate, and we need to address all parts of our operation. So the way we are approaching it, Sustainability Institute has the sort of nominal face of sustainability for Penn State. We are the place which sort of puts things together, and we are the ones who help develop the framework of sustainable development goals for the university. But we believe that sustainability will happen only when every individual unit owns sustainability and develops programs organically and internal to them. So we don't want to do sustainability for others. We want them to own sustainability. We think that if each year 5 or 6 or 10 units adopt our model of sustainability over a 5 or 6 year period, we would have penetrated the entire organization and made everybody sustainable from inside out. We do this by being a partner and a collaborator in co-creating programs. And structurally, what we have done is we have told all the units, there are 52 budgetary units at Penn State. Each college is a budgetary unit, each campus is a budgetary unit, athletics is a unit, and OPP is a unit, and FNB is a unit, etc. So what we are doing is we are creating within each unit the capacity to develop internal programs and sustainability by getting them to implement what we call the 3C structure. The 3 C's represent a council, a sustainability council, a sustainability charter or guidelines for action, and a chair or a person or a champion responsible for sustainability in that unit. I'm glad to report that in the last 12 months that we have launched this program, 10 colleges have accepted this and created a chair, a charter, and a council. 5 campuses have done so. Several other units, including the finance and business unit of the university, has created a sustainable operations council. The framework of sustainable development goals has been adopted. We tell people you don't have to pursue, not every single unit has to focus on every one of the 17 sustainable development goals. Collectively, as a university, we need to, but individual unit can contribute or prioritize their contributions to some specific goals that they have assets for and they have skills and expertise for. So in order to get this thing ramped up and moving, we have created a seed program where we seed certain projects. We put in a little bit of money to get this thing going within units. We enable units to commit and act on their own definitions of sustainability within the broader framework. And we help them communicate their success stories and build an overall narrative for the university. And we also have developed a series of metrics and measures to both measure ourselves internally, and we also report these to external review bodies. Recently, the London Times Higher Education conducted a review of impact of universities, and we ranked 37th in the world. There are some 800 universities reporting data, and what they are reporting data on is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So the work that we have been doing is getting noticed outside. We also measure ourselves on something called the STAR system of the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education in the US, and have a gold rating from them. Next slide. So in order to bring about institutional systemic change, we are making sure that sustainability gets embedded into operations. The way we build our buildings, the way we maintain lawns and our lands, the way we use electricity and the way we dispose our waste. These are the things that create the biggest ecological footprint from a university standpoint. So we've got a Sustainable Operations Council that has representatives from all the divisions of operations, including OPP and the information technology, human resource management, etc. They meet periodically, they develop their own programs, they focus on different things. Most recently, they put together a waste task force to help the university imagine a waste-free university. The task force reported prior to when COVID hit and things went somewhat silent, but it's a group that is focusing on all the operations of the university. We are also doing a lot of external partnering, SDSN, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We are founding member of the USA chapter of the network. PERC stands for Pennsylvania Environmental Resources Consortium. We are we have a representative from our institute leading that effort. And we are part of the Drawdown and the United Nations Economic Commission on the environment. So we're working with a lot of partners to make sure that first we learn from them about what the best practices are around the world, but also to convey our stories into these communities so that there can be mutual learning and sharing. Next.
So I think this is where I take back up,
Yeah.
But I know that we're running short on time. And so I just want to advance actually to say, you know, as we're looking forward and as Paul was explaining all the different ways we're trying to build a sustainable future at Penn State and help Penn State build a future looking forward to that 2070 50th anniversary or 100th anniversary of Earth Day and thinking about how do we contribute towards a sustainable future. One of the ways that we really want to start getting people involved is getting alumni, because you all are the perfect partners and natural partners in this. Many of you are out there leading the charge and impressing the world with just how much Penn State has innovative thinkers and leaders on sustainability. And we want to get you involved. Or if you're just interested in it, we want to get you involved. And one of the things we realized is that there's not a sustainability alumni interest group yet. And we're hoping to change that. And we would love to get as many people involved with that so that we can start engaging alumni more strategically and thinking about what are the ways alumni can be helping us here at Penn State get better. What are the ways that they can help students find their way into sustainability in the real world? And what are the ways in which we can partner with what you're doing to make every project better, both at Penn State and in our communities? And this is listing a whole bunch of programs that we have available. But I know we're almost out of time. So we will be sharing around in the follow-up to this call, this survey link. And I believe it's also going to be dropped into the chat. And so we really encourage you to reach out. I promise you, it's 7 questions, 3 of which are your name, your email, and your class year, and the other 4 of which are all multiple choice. And it's really to let us know what kinds of things you'd like us to see doing with alumni so that we continue this conversation and build towards a sustainable future for all of us in 2070. And I know we just only have a few minutes left, so I will turn it back over to Paul Clifford. But thank you all.
Absolutely. And thank you. If we can, good, we stop the screen share there so everyone can see us. We have a number of questions coming in and want to share them with you. But first question, Peter, how did Rachel Carson not end up at Penn State? She grew up in Pittsburgh, went to Chatham. For every time I hear a story about Rachel Carson, I think, how did we not recruit her to come to Penn State?
The one thing I can think of, and I know Penn State actually has a fairly good marine program. A friend of mine got her degree in marine biology here, but she started out as an oceans scientist. And so a lot of her work was very oceans focused. And I know Penn State is a great leader in that, but I'm guessing she may have wanted to go and be closer to the coast, but that's just a guess.
Right, I know she spent a lot of time doing research up in Maine, but I was always struck that she that she grew up in Pittsburgh. Interesting, you brought up the protests on the front steps of the U House where the president lived in 1970. If those protests didn't happen, then perhaps the Penn State Alumni Association would have a different home on campus, because as you know, that's now part of the Hintz Family Alumni Center, and became available when President Walker moved out of that house because of those protests and moved out to Bollesburg, where the president lived for a while until they moved over to Schreier House, where they're currently located. But I don't know that I had ever seen the pictures of the actual protests. I thought it was a little bit of folklore. Yeah. So the other thing that struck me about the presentation was that it was interesting that part of the narrative right at the very beginning in 1970 was the narrative of fairness and equality. And while there has been a lot done in that space in the last 50 years, the news of the day is that we still have a lot more work to do in that regard. And so maybe you all might want to talk just a little bit about the equity and inclusion pieces, a little bit more from an Earth Day perspective, from a sustainability perspective.
Paul?
Yeah, that's a really good question to focus on, given the national debate on anti-racism and Black Lives Matter. So I want to point out a couple of things. One is the reason why we adopted Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for Penn State for sustainability is that at least 3 of those goals include equity of some sort. So goal number 5, I believe, is equity around gender issues. Goal number 10 is equality among nations and within nations. So it covers both racial as well as economic. And then goal number 16 is about peace and justice, which includes social justice. So as a framework, we have all the resources that we need to address inequality questions. Second comment is that Penn State is already institutionally committed and has fairly extensive diversity, inclusiveness, infrastructure in place, both in academics through the Office of Affirmative Action, but also in sports around Title IX, and for recruitment and within finance and business. So we have, I believe, 3 or 4 vice provosts or vice president level people looking at diversity and inclusiveness. So we see our role at the Sustainability Institute as working in collaboration with that existing infrastructure to bring in some of the messaging around environment and sustainability. And an example of how we are doing it is in April, we are going to be inviting Dr. Robert Bullard, who is the father of environmental justice, to Penn State to do what we have done every year as the environmental colloquium, where we get a national speaker to come and talk to the issues of the day. And in order to prepare for that talk, we'll have probably half a dozen side events that will be bringing environment and social justice into clear relief for the whole university. So hopefully we'll be covering this in a very integrated fashion. Peter,
and I was just quickly going to add, because I saw it in the chat, that Bob Menard added in a very important article that just came out in Sierra Magazine about the intersections of environmental justice and climate change. And we've shared that internally, and I know Paul actually shared it with all of the deans on campus before July 4th. So I encourage you to take a look at that link, because it really does lay out the connections of how these are interwoven, that we cannot be addressing climate change or other bigger sustainability challenges if we're not addressing racial and social justice right alongside them, that the two stem from the same sources of problems and the solutions need to address both.
So as you might imagine, a lot of questions are coming in around the connection between COVID-19 and sustainability. And so I want to focus some of our conversation around that. First, around like, how does a black swan event like COVID-19 impact your sustainability planning, right? Unforeseen event, is now on our doorstep, and it shifts the country's focus towards the emergency and maybe away from some of the work that you all are doing. Talk about the impact that has had.
So I see the COVID crisis as an opportunity for the university and all other organizations to pivot from an unsustainable economic growth path that we were on for the last 50 years. So to me, it is not so much that it should distract people from focus. It is something that we should be thinking about. How do we build forward a new future that is socially just, that ensures the livelihood of people? Because one of the things we found out from COVID was within a week, the unemployment in the United States and in Pennsylvania was through the roof. And globally, even now, there is expectation that the economy is going to shrink, supply chains are going to be disrupted, employment is going to go down. That's not the kind of economy we want to recover to. So we need to get to a new kind of economy, and we need to do deep thinking about how do we get there. I don't have solutions on hand, but I know that this is the moment in which there is a kind of thawing of traditional thinking and an opportunity for what I call total transformation of the system, rather than what we have historically done, which is incremental changes to improve a little bit here or a little bit there. So to me, it's overall an opportunity to rethink transformation of Penn State, which we are attempting to do, but also rethink the transformation of the United States and the planet.
And I would just add too, in terms of rethinking that transformation, one of the things we've seen opportunities coming out of both COVID and the racial justice protests of the last several months is just how much innovation students can take when you let them lead and when you let them apply what they're learning here at Penn State into the real world. There have been such amazing examples of students getting out and helping their communities to address COVID and people's lack of access to food or inability to get out of their homes. There's also just been great teach-ins that students have developed on their own to say, these are issues in my world right now. How do I bring them into my learning? And I think the opportunity, especially as we all ponder this uncertain future, at least for this fall, if not this whole next year, of what does our education look like at Penn State, hybrid, on campus, off campus, online, there's a lot of opportunities to let students really say, well, let's lead with the issues and let's lead with the visioning of what do we want our future to look like. And when we let that be the starting point for their education, it breaks down the traditional siloed models that we have in our university. But I think it's the breakdown that we need to see happening if we're going to have these kind of innovative solutions going forward.
So one of the things that we are attempting to do, Paul, is to see what lessons that we have now learned in the last 3 months that we can make permanent. So just this fact of a distant or remote work environment, there are surveys that have been done of our employees, particularly there's one very large one of IT employees, who are saying that their productivity has not gone down as a result of working from home. So can the university, which is renting so much external space, find a way of doing this systematically so that we can save space, save money, save carbon footprint, reduce transportation, make workers more flexible so that they can take care of their family? Now, this won't happen for everyone, but if we do it thoughtfully, I think we can have a transformed workplace. So these are the kind of positive lessons that we want to take out of COVID.
Yeah, I remember April, May timeframe. After a month or so, a month and a half of being in a work from home state globally, you started to see articles come out. I remember an article about a city in India that for 30 years could not see the Himalayas. And because of the air quality and the improvement in just that short period of time, that they were now able to see the peaks that were off in the distance for the first time in decades. And so, yeah, I think that that's the question I have. I mean, lessons like that, there have to be a number of lessons that we have learned to say, look, in just this short window, we were able to have this big of impact, think if we could sustain that now over decades.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So I think yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go.
No, I think the big lesson to me is also around livelihoods. You know, the biggest disruption of COVID, of course, is health, and a lot of people have lost lives, and that is the biggest human loss. But then immediately after that is this kind of displacement that is happening in the global economy that is going to require us to rethink what a job means and how can we fulfill the need for livelihoods, perhaps differently connected to the workplace. And the International Labor Organization is doing some deep thinking around this to say what kind of livelihood mechanisms can we put into place so that if somebody can work only 10 hours or 20 hours a week because of whatever reason, but they still get their basic needs met. And this question has been asked repeatedly over the last 70 years. We've never put in enough social resources into it. But I think these are the big questions that I hope that COVID would lead to some transformative solutions on.
So questions come in from Greg Scott. He'd like to know what your thoughts are on the trend to separate sustainability into a separate degree in higher education, i.e. an MS in sustainability versus incorporating sustainability into the education coursework across all the degrees.
Yeah, that's a really good question and a really tough one to give you a very clear answer. I can tell you what we have been doing in terms of curriculum development on sustainability, and begin with sort of what our goal is. In our minds, we want to imagine a Penn State where not a single student or a faculty or an employee can get out without deeply understanding and having a literacy, an acceptable literacy level on sustainability. That's sort of our aspirational goal. How do we take an organization that is already embroiled in 150 years of curriculum history? Where can we inject sustainability into individual courses, into individual programs, as minors in colleges which have different majors, within majors, and so on. So this is a multi-level challenge. And we are working with the Faculty Senate, which is responsible for curriculum decision-making. We support the Curriculum Committee of the Senate to do deep thinking around curricular issues so that they are not just a kind of checkbox where you say you've done this course or that course, but they go to the learning objectives of the entire educational program. It will take time. This is perhaps the most fraught area within a university. When you start tinkering with curriculum, you get a lot of people upset. So we are going to do this cautiously. We are going to do it patiently, but we are going to do it in a 360-degree manner. That means not only telling people that this needs to be done at a curriculum level, but providing the faculty with the resources that they need, with the development that they need, because the problem is not just with students. Right. I mean, faculty get trained today in a PhD in physics and might never have taken a course in biology or sustainability to talk about, certainly not on poverty and hunger. So I think faculty need developmental help also. And so we are thinking about all those parts of the university that will need to be brought together. And the Senate is going to play a very central role in that build up.
And I would say, adding on to Paul's earlier comments about the SDGs, one of the things we always try to stress with the SDGs is we're not asking you to change what you do. We're asking you to think about what you do differently and to frame it differently. That's really what sustainability is. Almost every major on our campus is probably doing something related to one of those 17 sustainable development goals, but they're not thinking about it in those terms. And so when you train people to think differently, it's not asking them to change so much you have to do a whole separate minor or curriculum. It's asking them to think about how does what I do connect to other people on this campus, to other people in our communities, and what innovations in terms of research, in terms of community engagement, in terms of grant funding, all these other ways that you can think about problems differently. Who are the new allies that I have across the faculty and across the student body that I, as a supply chain management student, never thought to go talk to a history student, never thought to go talk to a biology or an IT student, and how when we start to think about sustainability, it actually gives more rich, vibrant opportunities for partnerships.
Yeah, I think that's the point that Kristen's trying to make in the chat room here when she talks about sustainability and to think about it like ethics or a subset of ethics, right? I mean, you take the lens of sustainability or the principles of sustainability, and then you layer that over really any topic on campus, like you might the lens of ethics and the principles of ethics. And so, yeah. The great presentation today. Thank you so much for joining us on the virtual speaker series and for allowing us to share the good work that you're doing here at Penn State with our alumni today. There's so much more that we could get to, and I'm sorry that we have run out of time, but want to thank Peter and Paul for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and we look forward to future conversations.
Yep.
Absolutely. And we want to thank you for tuning in, whether you're on Zoom or on Facebook Live. Thank you. As a reminder, we'll be hosting additional speaker sessions in the coming weeks and months. And this programming is in addition to the wide array of career services and online networking programs that we offer. You can find all of our virtual events at alumni.psu.edu/events. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We are
Penn State.
Penn State.